And welcome back. And what a great session we had there on the Giga projects in Saudi Arabia. Now, I know so many of you sent in questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get them to our panelists, but we'll certainly keep an eye on that. But I sincerely hope that throughout the discussion there, they answered some of them, a lot of them for you. But of course, there'll be great interest in that, I think, for many, many years to come. So thank you all so much for your involvement in that. We really, really appreciate your kind words and the fact that you're staying with us and asking all those questions. It means an awful lot to us here at the Big Five Digital Festival. So keep it up. I have a great panel coming up right now, and we'll be looking forward to more questions on this one. We're going to be looking at the future of construction and really, altering processes and indeed mindsets. I think this is interesting too, as to how the businesses can thrive in the VUCA world. I'm going to let our moderator explain that and bring him through exactly what he means by that one. But let me just tell you who we have in our lineup here. We have the managing director and partner from L.E.K, Dr. Mazen Skaf. He's joining us for this. The UAE country representative for the Institute of Civil Engineers, Mark Jamieson, will also be with us. From the Chartered Institute of Building Business Development board member, Nicky Dobreanu, he is with us also for this conversation. And moderating this session, the managing director for Strategic Anchors, Strategic Anchors, we have with us the managing director, Dr. Fadi Bayoud. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Fadi right now. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Etna. It is the VUCA world. It is vulnerable, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and disruptive, where yesterday's processes and mindsets cease to function. The engineering construction professionals are thus living in uncertain times, where classical problem-solving solutions are not working due not only to COVID-19, but due also to the ambiguous macroeconomic and political situations that were present prior to the pandemic. Like in many industries, but with a higher impact on our industry, today is unclear and tomorrow is unknown. Nonetheless, we still need to collaborate in order to deliver success. To do that, we need to change the way we think, perceive, construe, act, and communicate. We need to build our dynamic capability to unlearn and relearn, to be flexible and adaptive, to check our assumptions and paradigms. We need to transform our relationship across the supply chain to be more dynamic, collaborative, engaging, and creative. The relationship between the three major stakeholders in construction, the client/developer, consultant/engineer, and contractor, is extremely important. Many times, we hear of issues surrounding this relationship, be it unclear and/or unfrozen scope, delayed payments, incomplete and/or wrong designs, over-reporting on progress, poor quality, bad project management, cutting corners, and the list goes on. All these systemic issues cause delay and disruptions that eventually force all parties to pay a heavy price, not limited to financial. But what are the deep causes that create those issues? Is it the way the construction projects start that does not pave the road for real success? But what is success? Who defines success? Do the major stakeholders have common agreement on and understanding about success? Having said that, we also need to admit that this is an extremely complex industry with many players involved with billions of dirhams in stake. Good day to all again, and let's now start our discussion with our panelists. We will start with Nicky. Hi, Nicky.
Hi, Fadi.
In order to define and achieve success, we need objectives to measure upon. How can we align those objectives and assign those criteria that lead to common success? Nicky?
Yeah, I think success is a very negotiable term, and what success may mean to a party is not necessarily what success will mean for another party within the built environment. Traditionally, success was just delivering a project on time within the given budget and also to the required level of quality. But we're trying to expand this definition to take into account also the sustainability, the relationship between parties. Are they willing to work again immediately on a new project and deliver it successfully like they did with the previous one? How much value do they add to the project? So I think there's a need to change the mindset, and it's easier said than done, as always. But I think the key is to start educating yourself and your team. And what I think it's more important, because over the decades, it has been documented in many books, and maybe the more recent ones after the Egan and Latham reports would be the Farmer one, and the most recent one is by O'Neill. It's called Global Construction Success. And I do recommend the audience to read through it, because it's quite helpful to understand what we're lacking. Companies must adopt collaborative practices, which provide mechanisms that encourage the project teams to work together, rather than the current, against one another, by sharing risk and knowledge and facilitating collective learning and building trust. For me, the key is to have a project team, not different entities within the project team. It's just to have, it doesn't matter who you come from, whether you're a client, a contractor, a consultant, you are delivering a project, and that's your goal.
Excellent, thank you, Nicky. One more comment here, or small question. From the perspective of a client, what do you think, how do you think we can tailor this answer?
Well, from a client perspective, for me, it's simple, because it doesn't matter what hat I'm wearing. For me, the answer is the same. And I'll try to cover that towards the end. But from a client perspective, I think sometimes what happens at the very top and the understanding at the very top is quite different than the understanding of middle management or people who actually do the work. So I think we discussed this previously in another setting about how each party reacts to say, we're all trying to do our bit, and we're only looking short term in terms of advantages we bring to a project. And this mindset should change. I'd say the CEOs need to step in to understand each party and find a solution that is good for all. It's not just good for some parties and for short term.
Yeah, very well. We'll definitely talk about it at the end. Thank you, Nicky. For Mark, wearing two hats, the consultant, engineer, and the contractor, how do you think we can align those objectives and assign those criteria that eventually lead to the common success that we all strive for in our industry?
Well, as Nicky says, this starts with the owners themselves. The client must provide a level of clarity of their own objectives, and that requires a level of transparency not normally seen. My own experience from both sort of the UK and the local region is that you can gain a level of common success through the relationships of the individuals working together at project level. But for true success, you need to look at a different model. The likes of alliancing, where you have a common charter that is not only signed up to by the project team, but is actually signed up to by the leaders of each of the individual parties, is one of the ways that can happen. And providing clear plans and clear approaches and processes for being able to deal with the difficult issues is also really important, because if you cannot align those objectives, then you are still going to return to the world of conflict, shortcuts, etc. And I think that's probably for me the most important piece. You've got to set out your project on the right foot and look at this not just in terms of a product that gets delivered, but understand it in terms of, you know, what is the longevity, what is the end game of this, and equally, how can we make this a better, more long-lasting relationship?
Excellent, thank you, Mark. Mazen, as a management consultant who dealt for many years with negotiations and complex decision-making processes, having heard that and from your experience construction engineering, how do you think we can align those objectives and assign those criteria for success?
Thank you, Dr. Fadi. One thing I'd like to highlight is that there is significant information asymmetry among the three stakeholders in any construction project. And this information asymmetry is at the level of the project itself, the design, the objectives of the owner, the financial adequacy of the various players, commitments that they may have on other projects. So one rule of thumb is to share information amongst the three parties to reduce that information asymmetry. And there should be ongoing sharing of information. So in addition to the common charter that everybody agrees on, that Mark talked about, I would highly recommend that there is a clear understanding of the risks involved, that there is more time and effort put in the front end of the project to communicate about the various potential uncertainties and how they may impact the project. And as I said, the information asymmetry becomes even more important in very complex mega projects that are of a significant scale, and we can talk more about that. And then on an ongoing basis, there should be information sharing. There should be workshops to manage the cost and schedule risk drivers and get down to the specific drivers, and have these periodic workshops that bring together the three stakeholders on a specific project. And there should be a continual breakdown of the project into small pieces that are manageable, that can be compartmentalized and have people working on them and manage the risk related to the smaller chunks. And then reviews of the progress and understanding what are the opportunities for improvement and communicating these opportunities for improvement and applying them. And then there should be a clear definition of when a task is done or an activity is completed, so that and we'll get to that in a later stage in the discussion, so that a contractor or a subcontractor can invoice for such an activity being completed. And then we should also encourage taking a modular approach to the overall design and construction, because that helps also manage schedule risk in many ways.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Now we go to the second question. We discussed how we can assign and define those objectives and those criteria for success. And for any relationship, trust is very important, and trust makes wonders. But we know that in this relationship with the three major stakeholders, unfortunately, trust has a deficiency. And thus, we are suffering also because of that. If the question goes to Nicky again, what do you think, how we can create and sustain trust in such a tough industry to pave the road towards sustainable success so that we arrive into the objectives?
Yes, I think Mark already touched upon it, and I would start with a few questions. Is there a need for the client to always be right? Is there a need for the consultant to state that the client is right, or is right? Is there a need for the contractor to cut corners? And I think the solution, as Mark earlier alluded to, is a different approach to how we deliver projects as a team. And again, the key is to train, to educate, and to test these new approaches. The American Institute of Architects had introduced the idea of integrated project delivery about 12, 13 years ago, where in this approach, they try to integrate people, systems, business structures, and practices into a process that collaboratively harnesses the talents and insights of all participants to optimize project results, increase value to the owner, and reduce waste while minimizing efficiency. And some of the principles I want to mention very briefly are mutual respect and trust, mutual benefit and reward, collaborative innovation and decision-making, early involvement of key participants and early goal definition. I think this is essential because on some projects, if halfway through the project you ask each party what they're building, and you have 3 parties at the table, you might get 4 or 5 answers. Also, intensified planning, I think it's very, very important, as it is open communication and the use of appropriate technology. And above all, the organization and leadership on that project is a deciding factor in my view.
Thank you, Nicky. Mark, how would you like to add anything to what Nicky was saying concerning trust?
Absolutely. One of the key things to understanding and gaining trust is to actually to be open and clear about the risks that each party brings to the project. And being able to share those concerns in an open and transparent manner so that there is effectively a collective risk pot that can be managed. Equally, trust is about saying what you're going to do and then following through on it. So be that, payments, commitments on cash flow and ensuring that the supply chain is also maintained, because I think it's very easy to think about the relationship as just being the sort of the main contractor, the consultant, and the client. But inevitably, in the complex world that we build, it is hundreds, if not thousands, of components and people that are involved, and we often forget that actually, some people might go, oh, well, so-and-so is not performing, but it might well be that, in fact, it's not their direct issue. It's something to do with their own supply chain. So again, it's about aligning common goals and making that commitment and following through. And it's particularly important to be seen to be following through. If you're going to build trust, you cannot just keep giving promises and not delivering.
Very good, very good. And of course, stopping, I think maybe Nicky said it, stopping the blame game, right, as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. It does no one any favors. At the end of the day, and it is absolutely common practice, the CYA methodology of management, if you like, and that approach just does not help any project or program, and ultimately it doesn't help a client. And if we want longer term relationships, we have to move away from that approach that just assumes that I'm going to get blamed, so I'll make sure I already have a plan to blame somebody else.
Dr. Mazen, having heard those as well, do you agree? Would you like to add something more from your experience with other industries for solving solutions of other industries as well?
So trust is key for optimal risk sharing and avoiding a lot of the pitfalls. So no matter how well designed a contract is, if there is no trust between the parties, it's going to show up in various dynamics that will undermine the quality of the project and the overall delivery of the project. And trust is at the level of capability. Is this contractor or subcontractor able to do what they promise they can do? And then there is trust at the level of the integrity. Will they follow through on what they promise to do? So you need to establish these two, and you need to strengthen the trust in an ongoing relationship. And that is obtained by being clear in the communication of the risks that each party is worried about or knows about. Remember the issue of the information asymmetry, quantifying the risk and determining who's the party that's best equipped for managing that risk and carrying that risk based on their ability to control and influence the risk. So again, we need to move away from a transactional mindset in the construction industry where people look for the lowest cost provider, and maybe there is a big question as to whether they'll be able to fulfill the contract they are committing to fulfill. Taking a long-term repeated interaction perspective rather than just a single transaction perspective will also reinforce the trust among the parties.
Very good, thank you. The last question of this part of the session is if Dr. Mazen would like to continue with in one sentence, just one sentence without too much elaboration, how can we create a relationship that is conducive to success? If we can put it in one sentence.
It's information sharing and erring on the side of oversharing. And the more complex the project, the more sharing of information, concerns, objectives, knowledge about risks needs to happen.
In one sentence, how can we create this relationship that is conducive to success?
For me, I think it's about providing clarity of common objectives supported by a collaborative contract. And picking up particularly on what Dr. Mazen says, it is about changing the transactional relationships into more of an enterprise model. And there are plenty of examples now out there, such as Project 13, that is coming out of the infrastructure client group in the UK, where there are fantastic examples of best practice that this can be followed.
Thank you, Nicky. What do you?
Yes, I think in one sentence for me, and it's something that I encourage people to do as often as possible, is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And by other person, in this case, in the built environment, I mean just a quick scenario. Think that you have a large scale project that is during its project life cycle, it might last for 5 years. You start as a contract manager working on behalf of the client, and you create contracts with a consultant and with the contractor as well. Later on, the consultant wants to hire you and they make you an offer, you accept it, so you move to the consultant. The idea or the question you need to ask yourself, how does that contract that you defined when you were working for the client looks now? Is it still fair? Is it still reasonable? And then later on, maybe in the last year of construction, the contractor makes you an offer and you decide to move to them. Maybe they like your proactivity, they like your fairness. So then the question again, how do you see the contract that you defined as a client for the contractor? And I think as soon as you perceive the treatment or the type of terms that you see in a contract, be it in a transactional world or in an integrated project delivery world, how do you see that contract, I think, is essential. And this is an exercise that usually CEOs, CFOs, they can do. But other people in the middle, I don't think they always do this exercise. They just look after short-term success or what they think is success.
Unfortunately, it is the case, unfortunately. We now go into the next, it is a subtopic of the relationship, but because it's very important, we thought of including it in our session, which is the cash flow. And it's a very important factor of this relationship. And especially in these days, we always said that cash is king. Now cash flow is an emperor. I can think of two frontiers that might help in decreasing the impact of low or negative cash flow. The first one could be sustainable operational effectiveness and efficiencies. Since we are operation-based and project-based industry, and projects are operations. Now, if I can ask Nicky, if you can continue, please. Do you think that a proper sustainable operational effectiveness and efficiencies can reduce the impact of low or negative cash flow?
I think so, and I think in the end, when we talk about cash flows in an industry where there's very low margins and, as we mentioned earlier, extreme supply chain fragmentation, plus everybody's very vulnerable to the restricted cash flow. I think you mentioned cash is king, cash flow is an emperor, but I think also carbon is the queen. We need to think about sustainability as well. And what most companies don't focus on, and I have a really bad example, I won't give names, from Dubai. They just focus on either on profit or on cash flow, but they don't focus on both at the same time. So this lead designer I'm talking about, I met with some of their staff, and they said we're about 5-6 months behind with our salaries. And we understand why, because the company decides to pay our subcontractors or other designers first, and then we get paid as well. So very bad management at all levels. But I think, coming back to the proactivity, from a project perspective, I think project managers, they need to be trained on cash flow management software to understand that there's no point in front loading or end loading any of your invoices. There's a need to process them as soon as you can. Maybe sometimes send them ahead of time, have them ready. I mean, they're sent and they're just waiting to be paid. And from a corporate perspective, I think, aside from having that good project manager that knows about cash flow, again, anticipate the future cash flow. It's not easy, but if you use enterprise resource planning software, it might make your life a bit easier. And also to make sure that you spread out the costs. There's companies who do framework agreements at strategic level with different suppliers to get better value, maybe seek best deals, but always try not to pay with cash, immediately. Maybe try to finance a deal and free up cash. And in terms of payroll, I think a question is that needs to be asked is how often do you pay your staff, and how often do you pay your subcontractors or your contractors or designers if you're a client? There needs to be a very good balance. It needs to be leading to a repeat business and to improved quality in the future.
Very good. Mark, Nicky mentioned and to be able to function or to work on ERP and the likes. We know that project management for our industry is not at its best. And what can we do then to improve the operations so that we can reduce the impact of flow or network?
So when it comes to the sort of effective processing of invoices and the like, it is fundamental. I go back to London 2012. The Olympic Delivery Authority made effective positive cash flow one of its core objectives. And that resulted in them being able to process invoices in 8 days. Now, you typically find here we are anything from, invoice submission plus 30 days to invoice submission plus 60, 90. It carries on that way. And it's done just because, well, that's what we do. There is no clarity about why a payment is needing to take 60 days or 90 days. And then the same pressures get applied all the way down the supply chain. And I think that, again, with that London 2012 example, it wasn't just about the main contractors being paid. They had an automatic objective to demonstrate that they had also paid their staff, paid their subcontractors, paid their suppliers, and it changes the way that people behave. And if you can achieve that, then you start to get a sustainable business.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Mazen, I will skip this question, but please feel free to include your comments on this question with the next question, as they are related. We know that optimal and holistic management of working capital and cash flows in ways that optimize payables and receivables across the entire supply chain is very important. And having yourself worked in the supply chain finance, listening also to what Nicky and Mark has said, how do you see supply chain finance can help in improving the operations in this industry?
Very good. This is a very important topic, particularly in the GCC. And I'd like to highlight that having a healthy supply chain for the construction industry is important from an overall economic health perspective. It's important for the sovereign in terms of sustainability of businesses in the local economy. It's important for the industry stakeholders and also for large buyers within other industries like the energy industry, because it's a big buyer of EPC services and other client industry sectors. And also it's important for achieving local content targets, because if your supply chain is healthy, then you can achieve the local content targets that you've set out in various countries in the GCC. The current system that we see, unfortunately, whereby large companies or large buyers, some of them are sovereigns, that have low costs of capital, borrowing effectively from their smaller suppliers that have much higher costs of capital, is tremendously inefficient. So when a large buyer or developer delays the invoice to a major contractor, and then the contractor delays the invoice for the subcontractor, it's really, it's inefficient, because the smallest entity in the chain has the highest cost of capital. So supply chain finance, or reverse factoring, that's another term we can use for that, changes this and allows the smaller supplier to borrow based on the cost of capital of the larger contractor or the larger buyer. That's the philosophy of the solutions that are in place. And I've had the chance to work with multiple large buyers to put in place a supply chain finance solution that helps their suppliers to accelerate the payment of their invoices in one of two ways, either by accepting a discounted offer from the buyer themselves, or by accepting a discounted offer from a third-party financier on the platform. And this helps enhance the healthiness of the supply chain. It allows smaller contractors or subcontractors to do more business with a certain company. And also it ensures that companies don't go out of business. I mean, if we look at the UK and many OECD countries, 62% of invoices are paid late to SMEs. If you look at the GCC, the percentage is even higher and the delays are even longer. And this can mean the difference between a company, a smaller subcontractor staying in business or going out of business. So that's the importance for such a solution, and also separating the timing of when an invoice is approved and how people can access financing. And that's the whole philosophy behind such solutions.
Very good. And we can clearly see that how this solution can help in building a better relationship across the three major stakeholders, right, Dr. Mazen?
That is correct. That is correct. And it's sometimes, like, for example, a large buyer or owner delays the approval of the invoice because they're concerned they don't have enough cash in their treasury operations to pay. Well, separate the approval of the invoice, which should be tied to meeting a certain milestone on the project, from the payment. And we can work with various owners and sovereigns and large buyers on this problem, because there's no point of delaying the approval of the invoice, which should be tied to a milestone on the project, just because they cannot pay, and there are other solutions that can be put in place for that.
Very good. In previous discussions, we had that there is a certain project size or certain turnover that needs to be there in order for such a system works, or it can work on even smaller numbers. Because many of the projects here in the GCC, we have over $1 billion projects, but many of the projects are less than $1 billion. Is there a mechanism that works for those smaller, medium-sized projects?
Yes, I mean, the solutions are available. It depends on the various providers. Some providers have a certain threshold for the type of companies they want to work with, or the size of business a company has. But if we start with companies that have more than $1 billion in annual expenditures, you see a lot of the big owners / developers / buyers that meet that requirement. So let's start with these folks first, and the benefits will trickle down throughout the supply chain.
Very good, thank you. Nicky and Mark, if I can start with Mark this time. Having heard that, and we discussed actually a little bit before, how do you think that this can help in building a better relationship and the efficiency and effectiveness of the the industry?
Well, ultimately, it has to be in the client's interest to ensure that the supply chain is paid on time, because it's the implications for when you don't do that, and that is, you know, a key part of it for me. So if you have an approach that ensures that you as the developer is going to make sure that every part of the supply chain, from your consultants right through to the supplier of the paint or the manufacturer of a steel gate, is paid as per the commitments. And I think that's a key part of it. It comes back to making commitments and standing by them. We talked about this earlier, but I do believe that it is fundamentally important that, you know, when you're setting out the project objectives, that these sorts of things are considered. And Nicky quite rightly highlighted about the need to educate, because most of the time people forget about it. They just think about, okay, we've got a project, we got to deliver it on time and on budget, you know, and we've got to deliver it to the right quality. You know, that isn't what we have to do anymore. We've got a much bigger societal need, and we've got a much bigger challenge in terms of understanding how we create value by what we build.
Thank you, Mark. And Nicky, would you like to conclude this point?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by supply chain finance, and what I was trying to do in the past, I think it was tested in the UK already, was to think of a system where you can name and potentially shame people who don't pay on time, and they can be contractors, they can be clients, but I'm not sure if that's the right approach. What you can do with supply chain finance, I think you can just put the computers to work, and having the data, you can analyze the payment history and the invoice behavior to understand and to predict some patterns. Also to use that to infer credit and make decisions and spot fraud. Also, maybe you can use it to say, I'm not going to do business again with that contractor or with that client, because I know they're usually late with their payments. I think big data allows this by using statistical methods, and it's not a simple extrapolation of the past behavior to future behavior. Again, my problem here in adopting SCF, the main one is cultural, and it's maybe relating to lack of training, different buyer-supplier objectives, lack of top management commitment, and low suppliers' interest rate. The cost of adoption is another issue, but I'll look into it again with Dr. Mazen, just to understand more about how it works, the costs involved, because this would be good to be brought to the GCC. I think it would be amazing.
Totally. So, Nicky, I want to also comment on what you presented. I fully agree with you that such platforms, the ones that are very well designed at least, make use of the data, because there's like one platform I've seen, there's over 1.7 million suppliers globally trading on the platform. And there's so much data that you can tell, for example, that this supplier in that kind of industry, they would accept, let's say, a 6% discount off of the invoice to go and be paid at day 10 versus at day 45, for example. And this helps you optimize the offers on the platform for early payment of various invoices. So there is a lot of use of the data that's available there, and using AI and machine learning, you can optimize the offers and provide even more value-added products and services. And would love to talk more about this and see how we can address some of the issues in the GCC related to cash flow management within the construction industry and other industries also.
Now, also, this will entail that this whole supply chain will be on some kind of a portal, and then we then will start talking about digital transformation for the entire supply chain, which is by itself a beast by itself that requires many sessions to go on with. So by this, I believe we finished the major two topics that we were planning to talk about today. So the final question, if we can start with Mazen, with Mark, Nicky, and then with Mazen. The final question is, how do you think CXOs need to behave, and what aptitude they require in order to navigate through the complexity of the construction industry and succeed in the future? Umar, if you may.
Sure. So whilst we face a pandemic today, the bigger issues around human consumption and climate change must remain at the forefront of the CXO strategic agenda. Most of the assets that are already built or under construction will be the ones that we have in place by 2050. So how do they ensure that the built environment is going to meet the future needs of society and what they have to do to change today to make tomorrow a better place?
Yeah, what I'm thinking about as well, just to add to what Mark said, I think sustainability is essential. At the end of the day or the year, the decade, it doesn't matter what we do, as long as we're just compromising the life of future generations by our acts. So what I recommend CXOs is to have just to take a step back and to look at the whole process holistically, and to go as done as, if I give Expo 2020 as an example, they have a workers' welfare program, which looks also how employees are paid, if they're paid on time, if they're paid in full, because all these small things, they can be considered small by many, but they all have their impact on the final success of a project. If you don't pay your people on time, they'll not do very good work because they're not motivated. If you're taking their documents, again, the same issues. So I'd say a responsible and sustainable developer would look at all things, not only what's apparently bringing more value to them, and that it's mainly around cash and time. I would encourage them to look at the picture holistically.
Holistic picture, this is excellent. Dr. Mazen, being a strategist yourself, and you've dealt with boards, with CXOs all over the world, and having discussed the industry today, what are those qualities that CXOs have to have so that they will be able to think strategically, holistically, and plan for the future rather than sitting and doing firefighting, which is most of us, unfortunately, this is what we are doing in the construction industry. We firefight. What CXOs need to do to stop firefighting and plan for the future, which is actually a job of the CXO?
Very good. In terms of the capabilities and skills and the aptitudes they need to have, I would highlight listening and listening and listening to the market, listening to stakeholders, listening to signals from various parts of the environment around them. That's a key skill I would mention. Learning and scanning the horizon, having a strategic mindset, taking a problem solving and learning perspective, and having skills in conflict resolution are essential and very much relevant to the topics we talked about. And then understanding technology and digital solutions and how they're able to enhance the capabilities of their own organization. And then tolerance for ambiguity and ability to assess a situation and understand exactly how best to employ innovation and creativity to enhance outcomes, either to the clients, owners of a certain project, or from an overall societal perspective. And then with this, I'd like to get back to the importance of ESG from the way we run our business, especially going forward. People within this pandemic have learned the importance of sustainability, and this is top of mind for investors, for various stakeholders, employees, and the society at large. And this should be driving the strategic agenda, as my colleagues on the panel also mentioned, and will carry us over the next 20 to 30 years. And we'll see that the world, we will have to simplify and go with modular approaches, standardization, looking at how we can ensure sustainability by cutting out the unnecessary costs and emission footprints that we used to carry in our operations. All this will be rethought, and this is happening right now in the boardrooms.
In this conference session, we try to shed some light on the bruised relationship with the aim to contribute a small understanding of why things happen the way they do. In this conversation, our discussion reaffirms the need to have common objectives. and where trust between the three major stakeholders and across the supply chain is a cornerstone. This trust cannot be achieved with the current business model that is very transactional and based on the blame game. Cash flow is an emperor. Though there are solutions actually in the market that help in managing it, but trust again needs to be present and based on the common aligned objectives. As for TCXOs, we found that they have to have future perspective and they have to acquire the future thinking skill. Taking a holistic view on things around them, especially sustainability in everything that they do. This topic, or the topics that we discussed, require many meetings and workshops to really understand the deep causes of these bruises. Let us hope that this conference session, or conference sessions like this as well in the future, will encourage the major players in joining forces to heal and advance collaboration for the benefit of all, and to have a sustainable engineering and construction future for the benefit of our planet. Thank you all. It's been a wonderful discussion. And now we leave the floor to our Q&As from our listeners.
And thank you so much for that interesting panel. They're looking at, what we need to do in terms of construction, its future, also altering and aligning processes and indeed mindsets, looking at times when it's volatile, uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. I think we're going to probably see that for a long, long time in this industry and indeed beyond. I want to thank Dr. Mazen, Mark, Nicky, thank you so much. And Dr. Fadi, thank you so much for moderating that panel. Really, it was an absolute delight to listen to you and to hear everybody's input in it. If I might continue on, and we have a few questions around this, but Mark, if I might start with you. And again, it seems like from listening to you all, it's about almost going back to the very fundamentals, back to the drawing board, and really looking at building stronger partnerships, but building them from the very beginning. It's there's no point trying to play catch up halfway through, and finding that strong alignment, I suppose, at the contract stage. Would that actually go a long way in terms of helping people to deliver a smoother process, so to speak?
Absolutely, Anna. I think the set out the stall in the right and set your train in the right direction, you're going to make a much smoother program and a much smoother project. Setting out a contract type that allows for better collaboration, that also aligns the common objectives of everyone that's involved in the project, even though some of those might only be contracted later, is really, really important. It also is about setting out a culture whereby the objectives of the project are known by all parties. There's a higher level of transparency, which allows everyone to be focused on its delivery. Because if you have at any point that conflict and you haven't set out a common goal, then effectively you basically revert to norms. And that means you get into conflict, you get into problems, and you don't address the issues in a collaborative way.
Mazen, you talked a lot too about better communication and sharing of more information. And that's, I think it's a very honorable thing to do. Every industry needs to do it. They need to build better partnerships. I think we're really looking at this to the future. But sometimes, and this is a question that has come in, the contract and the rigid processes actually prevent collaboration in many ways. So how can, one use contracts and processes, in fact, to actually enhance that relationship?
Very important point. And if we think about this crisis that we just are going through, the COVID-19 crisis and its implications, it highlighted the fact that trust is the main currency that we have in today's world. So without trust, no matter how you perfect the contract, it's not going to take you too far. So at the very basic level, there should be a certain level of trust between the parties, and trust in terms of having this ongoing relationship, not a transactional mindset as we talked about. And this will help the parties think about beginning with the end in mind and the long-term relationship and the repeated interactions between them. And then this way they would value making sure that they uncover the various perspectives and information. And here, the reason this is very important, there is significant asymmetry of information in such large deals. What the contractor knows about the owner and what the owner knows about the contractor, even at the level of the objectives, even about risks, uncertainties about the type of soil, some soil stability issues, all this stuff, there's significant information asymmetry, and the processes should be designed to reveal the uncertainties and the information in a way that is really in value focused and focused on the delivery of the objectives of the owner. So it goes both ways. And as we said, in very large, complex projects, by being transaction focused rather than value focused, sometimes the owner / developer may wind up selecting the inadequate contractor, and it's really a lose-lose situation for everybody involved in such a situation. So that's why being clear about the information sharing upfront helps reduce the information asymmetry, which will continue in such a situation, but you minimize it at least.
Nicky, when we look at making sure that it's win-win for everybody, I mean, cash flow is actually essential for all the parties, but also the risk management that's in place. I mean, how can it be more evenly distributed, if it can at all? Nicky.
Well, yeah, thank you, Edna. I think the risk is a problem of the way in which contracts are formed and different types of arrangements for procurement. If you have a traditional procurement, or if you have a design and build, or if you have a management type approach to the procurement, that will shift the risk from one party to the other. Depending who you ask, even within the same company, if you get 3 or 4 professionals together, you might get 4 or 5 different answers, because nobody takes the time to sit down and to see on this particular project, what are my priorities? It's always good to have the risk allocated to the party that is best to deal with it. But sometimes, I don't know, clients usually like to push some more risk onto the other side. And what they usually end up doing is paying for that risk, which never materializes. If it's a negative risk, you never get to that point. Contracts are drafted in a way that it's not only single-sided, but from one point onwards, it's a disadvantage for the client if you exaggerate with the terms and the conditions. But yeah, I think being moderate in everything you do, and I think the main key is sitting together before signing, not even getting to the point where you're close to signing, but just discussing how that project will be run throughout its life cycle, and making sure that the risks are allocated again to the party that can deal best with them.
Now, Fadi, I'd like to bring you in on this too, and it's just on the very topic of this conversation here. As we do all this in the VUCA world, looking at it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. It's not going to change, Fadi. So ultimately, we can have these expectations, next year, in 5 years' time. It's always going to be volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And if it's not, it's probably not much fun actually out there. But still, these challenges, they're the given ones. What can management do, and what can mindset and perhaps strategic management? How do you say that this actually can maybe help mitigate it a little bit and make life easier? A little technical issue. Fadi, start again for us there.
Okay, hi. Okay, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Edna, for this question. Yes, we always lived in a disrupted world and in the VUCA world, but the VUCA world that we're living now is more intense than previous worlds we lived. So, for example, if you read a paper or a magazine 30 years ago, they always talked about this change and the need to change mindsets. But now what we're living in right now is more intense, more strong than
what we used to live before. So we do have to change the mindsets, and the mindsets have to always be on a dynamic movement. And this can happen through a proper strategic management. And when we talk about strategic management in the VUCA world, we have to change the way we did strategic management before. Now we have to align people and processes in a way that we need to have an agreement on where to focus our main resources and dedicate the efforts in order to know when, where, how to do things differently. Yes, we are living in VUCA world, and this proper strategic management, if we have a proper strategic management, we can be less vulnerable to change. We are then able to minimize the impact of this uncertainty, and we can develop learning through complexity and become more flexible, because the way we are handling things now, the way we are handling things now will put us it will put us in a road that we had already walked before and we failed. So we need to have a new mindset, a new strategic management mindset that allow us to navigate through disruption and be comfortable with ambiguity.
Indeed, you're so right there in many ways, that we all have. It's a very conservative industry in many ways when you think about it, and other industries are breezing by us in many ways here because they're thinking differently and their minds are open. So I like what you said there, Fadi. Mark, if I can bring it back to the Institute of Civil Engineers, and I have a question that we can maybe tie into qualifications here, if I could. An interesting question that's come in. I'm trying to give you the edited version. Thinking about, people need the right qualifications. So obviously, let's say a conventional project, if one was to put it as this viewer did, needs a driver's license. The manager of a mega project needs a license, the equivalent of a jumbo jet, so to speak. So how you don't want one managing the other project, basically. So how can you actually, align and maybe help people scale up in terms of the type of project that they can manage to make sure the right people are in the right job, so to speak? Mark.
Thank you, Anna. I think with the complexity of today's projects, there's certainly value in having professionals leading those projects. We've seen that mandated in certain parts of the world. Qatar particularly now requires a certain level of professional qualification, i.e. postgraduate qualification, for certain roles, both on site and in the design process. And for me, there's nothing wrong with that. What it does is it actually introduces people to the fact that in this volatile world that we live in, this level of uncertainty that we have to work around, you're always learning. And part of your professional upbringing and drive is to make sure that you never stop learning. So a good leader also understands his own limitations, as opposed to just dictating and mandating what needs to be done. And professionals have to stand by a code of ethics. And all of this, again, leads to a path whereby collaboration, alignment of objectives, and setting out things clearly, understanding, as Nicky said, who is the right person to take a specific risk, all comes together much more clearly than when you don't. So I would advocate that there is a value in that. Now, whether it is a single unified qualification or certain title, that's a much trickier question to answer.
I understand it, definitely. And on that one, I don't have time for. Unfortunately, we're running out. Nicky, if I might, and then I want to come to Mazen and talk about supply chain finance very briefly. But Nicky, quickly, in this region, sometimes it's all about the lowest cost provider. And, it's probably sometimes the number one factor. What can we do about this? Because it's not always who delivers the best, quality and the best job, particularly when we want to go digital and introduce all these new fancy tools.
Well, I think that the first step now would be to get people educated, to educate clients, to educate developers, and also the people who award contracts. Because I have two examples: one good, one bad. The bad one is from Dubai. The good one is from Abu Dhabi. long story short, in Dubai, I was a cost consultant. I recommended the 4th lowest tender in value. The design team said they're all eligible. They didn't give any score, and therefore the client chose the cheapest. And 6 months later, they had to fire them from the site because they couldn't even provide basic documents to get some advance payment. In Abu Dhabi, the 2nd lowest was recommended only because their BIM department was in-house as opposed to outside. It was a 2 billion project, and the difference between the two was 10 million only. For that scale, I think it was a right choice. And everywhere around the world, contractors are cutting corner if you force them to. Sydney, Australia, last year, a building almost collapsed, high-end building. So again, it's around the world. It's not only in this region.
And when we hear stories like that, I mean, yes, that really demands that people actually maybe look at different considerations. Mazen, I'm leaving you the last word on this. Looking at supply chain, in construction, and particularly supply chain finance to really help people, particularly when it comes to financing. If you can kind of give me a quick focus on that one, and then we'll wrap it up. Mazen.
Unfortunately, he dropped off.
Mazen is gone on that one. I think that's one Nicky also. We've lost.
Yes, I can also respond it now. I mean, in terms of, I think this is something I've been very passionate about as well. Mazen knows more, but I tried to find Sharia compliant supply chain finance providers within the UAE. I'm in discussions with some, but didn't get anywhere yet. But the main benefits that I see for employers, because they're also struggling sometimes with cash flow, would be to have a long payment term, so they can arrange a payment to be done in advance to a supplier, and they pay a small fee to do that. They can repay the supply chain finance provider later, so again they pay a fee for that. It makes it easier to work for your working capital. Also, you may get discounts for using cash, and your balance sheet will not be affected. In terms of the supply chain, they will have fast access to cash, a good overall balance sheet, smooth business processes, and also higher trust levels due to the banks getting involved.
Super. I'm going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you all for coming in. Mazen, sorry I didn't get to ask you that last question. Nicky, you did it good justice. But I do want to thank you all, and I know you addressed it very well in that conversation there. Fadi had put that question to you. So once again, a big thanks to all of you. Thanks for staying with us for the Q&A. And once again, Fadi, thanks for moderating that panel. Thank you all so much.